Chapter 37, June 10th, 2173, 1827, Citadel Widow System, Ad Astra HQ. My eyes snapped open and I sat up, looking all over my office in a panic. I could feel how my heart was beating in my chest at a tempo as if I had just run a marathon. It took me almost a minute before I calmed down enough to get my bearings. Grabbing the bridge of my nose, I closed my eyes and shook my head slightly, muttering, "Don't get so worked up, Oscar. It was just a nightmare." Coming back to the Citadel after months of absence and staying only for a short time filled my schedule with appointments with people and events only I could attend, be it people who wanted to speak with the big boss at the top and not someone they perceived as below their station, or my appearance in the departments where my employees from other species worked. Everything had to be handled by me while I remained on the Citadel, since nobody else could take over my duties for just a moment without offending anybody else. That, in turn, led to me not sleeping enough for the last few days, and was also why I just woke up in my office chair. I lifted my arms above my head, interlinking my fingers and pulling my shoulders upward. Satisfying cracks sounded out of my shoulders and back as I pushed my hands slowly backward. There was nothing better, in my opinion, than a bit of light stretching after waking up to get rid of the remaining dizziness of sleep. My eyes wandered to the clock hanging on the wall to the right to check the time. The clock had been a gift from an associate who had been immensely grateful to have been chosen for a particular task. It wasn't like he was the best choice, but I wanted to hire a local business instead of someone, perhaps a better competitor, from out of the solar system. Supporting local companies always sounded better in the press. Anyway, my associate was grateful to be chosen that he procured an old clock face of a clock tower that was some 100 years old when I mentioned to him that I was interested in history. It had a storied history to its name, and I told its tale to more than one person who stepped into my office. In fact, my office had more than one object with a rich history behind it. Curiosities, gifted by others or collected by myself. Talking about them always helped to break the ice during a tense meeting or get the other person to relax. The clock face was just the biggest one in my office and spared me the need for other clocks apart from the one in my Omni tool. It was right around 6:30, and in another 15 minutes, I would have a meeting to decide if Ad Astra opened a new branch in a new technological direction. My hand moved to the intercom to my right, and I pushed the button to connect me to the front desk. "Carol," I began, "is my 6:45 appointment here?" "No, Mr. Denebrin. He hasn't arrived yet. I will ask at the front desk. Perhaps he already entered the building. I will call when I know more." "Thank you, Carol. You're a dear." Pushing my chair back, I stood up while rolling my shoulders to get rid of the rest of the kinks. My steps brought me to the clock face's left, and I slid my hand gently over the wall. With a soft click, a part of the wall separated itself from the rest, sliding a bit back before disappearing to the side and into the wall. A small bathroom was behind the door, and I stepped into it to throw some water in my face and check if my clothes were still looking good. Looking neat and orderly was a vital aspect of every business meeting. Nobody wanted to make a deal with someone who couldn't even be bothered to take care of themselves and their clothes. Something like that didn't inspire trust in their abilities and in the person themselves. Taking a towel from the side of the wash basin, I dried off the remaining water on my face before dumping the towel in the basket for used ones. I left the hidden bathroom, and the door behind me slid seamlessly back into its original place. Without previous knowledge of its existence, nobody would be able to notice it without any tools to help them. "Mr. Denebrin," Carol's voice rang out from the intercom. "Your appointment arrived at the front desk and is currently coming up to your office." "Ah, wonderful," I responded after walking over to my desk and pushing the button to respond. "Please show him in when he arrives." "Of course, Mr. Denebrin. Do you need anything else?" "If you could prepare a selection of drinks for us, that would be great. Coffee, hot and cold water, and some tea bags should be enough. I will bring them in when they are ready." "You're a dear, Carol," I thanked her and closed the connection. I took a seat on one of the 3 couches placed around a small table to wait for my guest. Bringing my Omni tool up, I checked my emails and the news while I waited. Thankfully, the wait wasn't long, and I barked a short "Enter" when the soft chime rang to announce that there was someone in front of my office. The door opened silently and Carol entered the office with my guest only 2 steps behind her. Carol was a short woman, barely exceeding the 1.5 m mark, and that was with high heels. Yet nobody who stood before her would ever dare to think of getting on her wrong side. She kept her long, dark brown hair in a strict fishtail braid that went over her left shoulder, and together with her white blouse and black pencil skirt, both without any wrinkles, she was a picture of professionalism. But it was her eyes, those dark, almost bordering on black, eyes that stopped anybody cold. She told me once that growing up in a community with very few cultural and ethnic varieties, while having a British mother and a Korean father hadn't been easy for her. She had been the only one that looked different, and, as children were wont to do, had often been the target of their childish cruelty. It took her a while, but she perfected a look that promised retribution if the opposite party didn't stop whatever they were doing. Of course, back then, she had to carry out that retribution if that look went ignored, which only helped to solidify the message that look carried. Thankfully, she didn't need to carry out any retribution anymore, but if she had to use that look, the message in her eyes was still clear to see for anyone. But if it ever came to it, I was sure that she wouldn't hesitate to do whatever she thought was necessary. Major Alec Ryder, military attaché to the human ambassador, she introduced with a slight bow to me, more out of formality than anything else. Thank you, Carol, I said with a smile, getting up from my seat and walking over to the two. If you will excuse me, she returned, and I dismissed her with a slight nod. Thank you for bringing me here, Miss Yoon, said Ryder with a deep voice, somewhat rough from a life of shouting orders in the heat of battle. She gave Ryder a sharp nod and left the room to bring us the refreshments I asked for. As I got closer, I got my first good look at Ryder. He looked older than I remembered. What, of course, wasn't that much of a surprise since we hadn't seen each other in years. If I was honest, he was looking closer to the hazy image I had from the Mass Effect Andromeda game than the young man he had once been. Yet that could have been just my imagination. After all, with every year I spent in this world, my memory concerning the details of the games had grown hazier. The important plot points still stood out, but smaller, less important details started to disappear with time. And then there were the things I never bothered to remember in the first place. For example, I still remember that there was a side quest in the first game concerning Prothean data disks, which would be mighty useful things to have, but on which planets they were, that's something I never bothered to memorize. And it's not like I could look up those things on a wiki page somewhere. Turning my thoughts back to Ryder, I observed him more closely as I held out my hand for him, which he grabbed and shook with a firm squeeze. His face was clean-shaven, and if I had to guess, he probably did it this morning, as no new hairs were coming out, which would have been easily seen as black hair tended to stand out on white skin. Along with that, I noticed that he looked rather pale, as if he hadn't seen the sun in quite some time. Furthermore, there were light shadows under his eyes, like he had only recently gotten enough sleep to keep functioning at peak conditions. It's good to see you again, Major Ryder. What has it been, 10, almost 20 years since the last time? I greeted him with a smile. I'm doing fine. Thank you for asking, Mr. Denebrin, he answered with a smile of his own, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Nonetheless, I could see that it was genuine. Ryder's eyes moved over my face and all over my body in quick motions, probably analyzing me, just like I did to him. I let go of his hand and pointed toward the sitting area. I'm sure we could use some comfort while we discuss, so why don't we take a seat? Carol should return with some refreshments soon anyway. That's not necessary, Ryder tried to refuse while moving to one of the couches and sitting down. I took a seat on the one opposite of him and made myself comfortable. It may not be necessary, but I'm still doing it. Or rather, Carol is doing it. There won't be any rumors of me being an inattentive host as long as she's working for me. If you insist, conceded Ryder with a quiet chuckle. I don't want Miss Yoon's efforts to go to waste if she's already doing this. I haven't yet met anybody who would dare to waste her efforts. There's nobody brave enough to do so. Not even me, and I'm paying the woman, I joked. I could see how Ryder's posture slowly relaxed. From the moment he sat down, he was almost as stiff as a board, and his whole body just screamed tense to me. If it was because of me, this meeting, or something else, I didn't know. But thankfully, my joking and light attitude helped him to get comfortable. It wouldn't do either of us any good if one of us was stressed during the whole meeting. She seems like a formidable woman, commented Ryder, and as if summoned by his words, the door to my office opened once again. Carol entered with a tray held between her hands. As she got closer, I could see the assortment of drinks and cups placed on it, and a small bowl with a few tea bags stood on the side. She placed the tray on the table between us and asked, "What do the gentlemen want to drink?" "I think we will be able to pour the drinks ourselves." "Thank you, Carol," I said with a nod to her, trying to dismiss her. "It will be no problem, Mr. Dennebrun. You have worked hard the whole day, so let me take over such mundane tasks." "You certainly deserve to be pampered a bit," she responded, and while her words may or may not have driven some heat into my cheeks, her smile froze the blood in my veins. She wouldn't take a no for an answer, so I just gestured toward the tray and said with a sigh, "Then I would like a coffee, please." "Of course, sir," Carol answered, and the ice in her smile disappeared like it had never been there in the first place. She took a cup, poured some milk into it, and filled it with coffee before taking a spoon and adding a drop of honey. "Just like you prefer it, sir," she said, handing me the cup, before turning to Ryder. "And for you, Major? A coffee as well," he said, already knowing that there would be no backtalk allowed or assurances that he could do it himself. It didn't take long until Carol prepared Ryder's coffee and left the office, but only after reminding us to call on her if we needed anything. An offer which was more of a command than anything, we acquiesced to with silent nods. "So," I said after a few moments of silence during which we enjoyed our coffees, "I guess Anita already talked with you about the reason I asked for this meeting." "Yes, she told me about it," Ryder admitted. "Furthermore, she also said it was her idea to arrange this meeting." "That's in the eye of the beholder," I waved his words away. "In the end, it was still my decision to hold this meeting. Anita may have pushed the first stone, but I'm going to try to make a building out of them." "And what made you decide to continue with this course? AI isn't a topic that is well liked in Citadel space," inquired Ryder. "I should know since I've dabbled in it for personal reasons." He looked somewhat uncomfortable when he evaded to outright state his reasons for delving into a subject that could cost him his career in the Systems Alliance military if the wrong person heard about it and decided to do some damage control. Humanity's situation is nowhere near being a proven entity in the galaxy. We're surrounded by sharks that would like nothing more than tear us apart and use us for their own benefit. Some would like dear friends while using us to bolster their power, while others would like nothing more than to collar us and keep us as their pets. In essence, you want to give humanity an advantage that the other galactic entities can't replicate without stepping into a territory they themselves declared taboo, concluded Ryder. Exactly, I agreed enthusiastically. I haven't followed this avenue as consistently as I perhaps should have done, but I'm trying to rectify this mistake right now. Anita highly recommended you, and I'm inclined to follow her advice. If she thinks you're capable and trustworthy enough not to develop an AI that is going to kill us all and prove the Council's fears, then of course I'm going to reach out to you. So are you interested? Ryder leaned back into the couch, taking a moment to gather his thoughts. All the while, his eyes never left my face, trying to find any trace of deceit. He was wary, that much was clear to me. The offer was probably too good to be true for him to just accept it. It wasn't like I didn't understand his hesitancy. The stress he must have lived with had to be enormous. At any moment, he could have been dismissed from his position in the military if the wrong people found out about his research. And now there was me, someone with enough power to legitimize his research and the assets to support him at every step. Ryder began hesitatingly, choosing his words carefully, inclined to take you up on your offer, Mr. Dennebrun. I have to admit, my reason for delving into this subject is not entirely centered on improving humanity's position among the rest of the galaxy. Instead, they're more in the selfish category. Yet, I can also see how the ideas that are swirling in my head could improve the lives of humans across the galaxy. The military is only one of the possible fields where it could improve the lives of thousands. I nodded along with his explanation, already knowing why Ryder had started his research. From the games, I remembered it had something to do with his wife, and after some research into the Ryder family's circumstances, I had a better picture of the situation. It wouldn't surprise me if you know most of the reasons why, he continued. I do, I admitted unashamedly. It wouldn't do me any good to deny knowing anything. If anything, it would only work to the contrary. Should you decide in my favor, I'm sure we can work something out that will benefit your wife's health. I know I shouldn't have done it by the way he glared at me for bringing it up, but I couldn't resist the opportunity to dangle a carrot in front of his face. Please don't glare at me like that. I lifted my hands in surrender. I take care of my employees and their families. It's been a company policy since the beginning. Why do you think people are running over each other to work for me? His glare lessened before he started to chuckle. I guess I should have expected you to do this. I don't know if you're trying to coerce me or if you're just that nice. I would say it's a little bit of both, I admitted. Well, grunted Ryder, at least you're not denying it. I can work with that. Does that mean? Yeah, he said, bringing a smile to my face. I'm taking your offer. It was only a matter of time before someone found out about my side interest. Avoiding a dishonorable discharge is probably for the best. And by working for me, you still can support the Alliance with your talents and research, just with much better funding. My last comment brought a sly smile to his face. That's one of the parts I'm most looking forward to. Truthfully, looking into AI development is a costly endeavor, and not one the Alliance would be happy to cough funds up for. I had to use my own savings, and those are slowly drying up. He sighed deeply. Furthermore, I'm not sure if I'm happy with the course the Alliance is currently undertaking. How so? I asked, my eyebrows furrowed. If something was going on that I or anyone else didn't notice, I had to know about it. It's just that the development of the military orientates itself too closely to what the other galactic superpowers did and do. Currently, we follow in the footsteps of the Turians and Asari. More ships, bigger ships. I feel we're not applying our talents the best way we could. There was some truth to what Ryder said. No, scratch that. There was a lot of truth to his statement. The Alliance Wehrmeyer and even I concentrated on increasing the standing military forces and the number of ships available. And not just that, the thought that bigger and better also meant more firepower had taken root in our heads. One only had to look at the monstrosity of a ship currently under construction in the Olympus system. The ruler-class ships would become an essential part of our power as a galactic entity and a mighty weapon to wield against the Reapers. But did it deserve that we focused only on it and those that would come after it? I found the answer to that question shortly after asking, and it was a resounding no. The more we focused on the ruler class, the more we neglected other parts of our military. For example, the current generation of fighters worked well, yet they could be better. We had some carriers, but there could be more. Besides, their modularity and the modules themselves could use an update too. We should re-examine our focus, I whispered to myself, yet loud enough that Ryder perked up when he heard me. Look at the parts that could use an update and do it. My voice got slowly louder as I saw more and more possible applications. And not just the military. We should take a good look at our whole infrastructure. How do we get our materials? How do we build the things we need? How can we make all those parts more efficient? I looked up from the part of the table I had been staring at and directly into Ryder's eyes. He flinched back for a moment before gathering himself. Perhaps he was taken back by the fire in them that would continue to burn in them for the rest of the week as I sent out orders to restructure many of my operations and the priorities of my think tanks, or so would Carol tell me later. I should write you a check for a bonus, Major Ryder. Not even part of the company officially, yet your counsel was already invaluable. Plans were forming in my head. The names of people I had to talk to appeared like that they were written on a list. Some of them would eagerly follow my orders and suggestions, while others would need some coercion, a bit of shouting, or outright threats to do so. I, started Ryder hesitatingly, before swallowing once and continuing with a strong voice, am glad to hear that I could help. More so that you also see that we could do things differently from what we're doing now. I didn't see it before, I admitted. Perhaps I was also stuck in that line of thought. Yet sometimes all you need is someone telling you what they see from the outside to change your perspective. And all those saying about new perspectives? Well, it seems they're true, Major. Not a Major for much longer, I think. I think if you call me Alec, that would be for the best. Mr. Ryder doesn't sound right after all the time I was called Major Ryder. If you think so, I said, a grin slowly appearing on my face. But for now, you're still a Major. So until you sign the contract, I'm going to call you Major Ryder. That should be all right. Right, Major Ryder? Ryder just let out a suffering sigh at my attempt at teasing him before shaking his head. I should never let you meet my wife. She likes to tease me fiercely. You two would get along well, perhaps too well for the sake of my sanity. The humor that had appeared in his eyes during our short banter disappeared and was replaced by an inquiring look. How long do you think it will take to build a lab and get it running? Now that I have some backing, I'm itching to get to work. It will take some time, I answered, thoughtfulness replacing my own humor. Getting the permit will take something over a month, 2 at most. The groundwork had been done a long time ago. I can't start building a lab before I have the permit in my hand. Otherwise, it would look like the council's decision was a safe bet for me, even if it is. The public and the council won't like that, and the latter is spiteful enough to delay the proceedings as long as they can if they're feeling slighted. Then comes the security checks of the lab. The first time by my people, after which we're going to close any security gaps we can find. The time after that, it's going to be council inspectors, and getting them to give the okay for the facility is going to be a whole different kind of beast. In the end, I would say it's going to take something between 8 months to a year. Well, responded Ryder, it's certainly enough time to get my affairs in order. And it's enough time for my resignation to go through the hell that is the Alliance military's bureaucracy. Is it truly that bad? Not always, answered Ryder with a snort. Sometimes it's worse. Chapter 38. October 22nd, 2173, 1423 local time, Arcturus Station, Arcturus System, Arcturus Stream, location, redacted. AIS Officer Oliva, redacted Idaho, AISO 028, KEX 23, X2. The conference room was a gathering of infinitely busy people. One always had to be aware of one's surroundings, or someone would run into you and knock you to the ground without any words of apology. Not because they were assholes, but because they didn't even have the time to utter a simple sorry. Everyone was on edge. Thankfully, everyone here was a professional, or else it would only be a matter of time until someone snapped. Or so Olivia thought as she looked over the data displayed on her datapad for the nth time. She couldn't allow herself to miss even the tiniest detail. Somewhere in those reports could be a hidden hint. And if it was there, she had to find it. Else, Director Clark would have her head. This matter was too important to leave even the slightest part to chance. Suddenly, a quiet settled over the room. There was no more whispering between people or the clicking of keyboards. The only sounds one could hear were the ones of shoes hitting the floor. Andrew Clark moved around the room like a predator. Every person he came close to could feel how a cold shudder went down their backs and looked relieved when he passed them without acknowledging their existence. Olivia had always known that Director Clark was a dangerous man, yet that hadn't been something that could be discerned by looking at him. It had been more of a gut feeling than anything else since the director possessed a mask only the most experienced and observant agents could glimpse behind. But today it was like the director left the mask in his office and wore the danger it usually hid like a cloak. The most discomforting thing was that while he oozed dangerousness and aggression like a leaky faucet, his face showed none of these emotions. Instead, it looked like stone. Not a single twitch of his facial muscles betrayed the storm of emotions that brewed behind it, and Olivia couldn't help but shudder at this display of absolute self-control. Director Clark unhurriedly took his seat at the top of the conference table. 2 guards, whom Olivia hadn't noticed until now, took their places to each side of him. It was unnerving that she was so distracted by Director Clark's presence that she completely ignored the 2 openly armed people walking only a few steps behind him. Perhaps unnerving was the wrong word for it, and the more she thought about it, the surer she was that scary was a more apt word to describe it. Yet, what was the scary part? The fact that Director Clark's presence could hide 2 armed men? Or the fact that Director Clark had the ability to change his presence in such a way that at one time one couldn't look away from him, while at other times it was so minuscule that people easily overlooked him? I don't want a recap of the events that brought us here, started Director Clark, and even the last murmurs that persisted inside the room died down in a flash. If any of you doesn't know them or forgot the details, then that person should leave the room now and hand in their resignation by tomorrow. This agency has no time for fools, especially in times of crisis. Director Clark's cold eyes swept over the room and fixated on every person for a moment before moving on to the next. When it was Olivia's turn, she could feel his cold gaze drilling through her eyes and into her soul, looking all over her and finding her wanting. She was glad when his eyes moved on and took a slow breath after having forgotten how to, while Director Clark's eyes were on hers. Yet somewhere deep inside her, there was a feeling of disappointment at her herself. The way Director Clark seemingly dismissed her as nobody of importance. Olivia wanted to change that. She wanted to prove to the director and herself that she could do it. What it was that she could do it wasn't something she thought about. The director finished his look around the room, and since nobody made any moves to leave the room, he nodded to himself once and continued as if nothing happened. How goes the analysis of the possible shocks in the aftermath of the failed assassination of Oscar Dennebrand? On the other side of the room, a nondescriptive man in a black suit, brown hair, and eyes that looked like they desperately needed sleep stood up with a tablet in hand and said, "We're still collecting more data to come up with a more detailed view, but we have a preliminary assessment. Please be aware that should any piece of information of significance come in, the situation could change drastically in response to it." There were nods all around the room, and with a simple hand gesture, Director Clark bid the man to continue. While Mr. Dennebrand is a big player in galactic economies, his impact on the political scene is minimal, at least as of this moment. Most of the galaxy treats the assault like a juicy piece of news and doesn't concern themselves further with it. The places where Mr. Dennebrand has holdings, except the Citadel and Ilium, are adopting a wait-and-see approach to the situation, and we can expect that nothing should change as long as Mr. Dennebrand has a speedy recovery. "And the Citadel and Ilium?" inquired the director. The business partners and employees of Mr. Dennebrand on the Citadel are somewhat in an uproar. They are incensed about the attack, but are already calming down again. Ad Astra's reputation and stock market value took a hit with Citadel brokers, yet depending on the way Ad Astra will respond to the attack, that won't be a problem for long. "Do we have to intervene?" asked a woman with short blonde hair, 2 seats down on Olivia's left. "Not at this moment, no," responded the man. If one had asked Olivia when she first got her current position as an operation coordinator in the AIS, why Ad Astra's and its owner, Oscar Dennebrand, well-being and reputation were a concern for the AIS, she would have answered that it shouldn't be. After all, Ad Astra, large as it was just another company. True, it probably was the by far largest human company in the galaxy for now, and simultaneously the largest employer in the Alliance. Yet that shouldn't make it a matter for the AIS. Only after she started to organize and coordinate AIS operations across the galaxy, she fully understood how interwoven Ad Astra was with the Alliance military and the AIS. Dozens upon dozens of fake companies to create new identities for agents were under the banner of Ad Astra. Do you need to transport a hit team to another planet? Suddenly there was an Ad Astra freighter that needed new mechanics. And one shouldn't forget the quite staggering amount of money that Ad Astra funneled through its books to keep AIS operations running and its agents equipped with the newest technology. She didn't even want to think about everything that kept Ad Astra connected with the military. However, one thing was absolutely sure. Should Ad Astra be destroyed, the Alliance's war machine would collapse in months, if not weeks. It would perhaps take years to rebuild it, and it wouldn't show the same rapid growth it did now for another decade after that. Not many knew that, and Olivia knew those few that did would prefer to keep the knowledge hidden from the public. Thankfully, plans were already in motion to reduce the dependence on Ad Astra, and, as far as she knew, Oscar Dennebrand was part of these plans. Yet at this moment, those plans weren't nearly enough advanced to let anything drastic happen to Ad Astra, lest the Alliance would suffer for it. Still, continued the man with his analysis, while the Citadel's situation is currently under control, if anything happens, the mood could turn quickly, and it could become a second Ilium. "What's happening on Ilium?" Olivia blurted out, and a few heads turned in her direction at her sudden question. The man blinked, not having expected Oliva to interrupt him, but continued without missing another beat. Ilium had become a literal and metaphorical battlefield. Oscar Denebrin made many enemies from all walks of life on Ilium, and they're now smelling blood in the water. Cooperate enemies try to tear up his Ilium branch and assimilate its parts, while at the same time, gangs are attacking his workers and holdings. It is too coordinately to be a simple coincidence, but we don't know who holds the strings in the background. Should the situation continue for much longer, Ad Astra will be forcefully evicted from Ilium, and that will send shockwaves through the galaxy. I will defer the decision to the director, but it's my recommendation that we send in some teams to help control the situation. Everybody looked toward the director, who didn't seem concerned about all the sudden attention directed at him. He only closed his eyes for a moment to think before opening them and saying, "I will take your recommendation under advisement. Please continue your report for now." "Of course, sir." Olivia could see how tense the man had suddenly become and wondered what he had to report that had him so nervous. "The situation inside the Alliance is precarious," he said with a tone of finality, "especially on the outer colonies. The attack on Oscar Denebrin caused an outcry of anger and disbelief. Many are baying for blood. The fact that only members of the other species were part of the attack has become a rallying point for those with xenophobic tendencies, and their viewpoint that the aliens attacked Mr. Denebrin because they wanted to prevent him from continuing to advance humanity is gaining ground on all planets belonging to the Alliance. On some of the outer colonies, attacks against aliens were perpetrated by the locals in retaliation for the assassination attempt. Nothing serious like that happened in any of the more developed colonies, but the mood is shifting in that direction. It won't take long until we are going to hear about assaults from those colonies. The fact that there are individuals and groups fanning the flames of xenophobia to further their agendas doesn't help in the slightest. "Is there any recommendation on what we should do?" asked someone from the other side of the room, but Olivia couldn't identify who exactly asked the question. "The best would be if Mr. Denebrin showed himself to the public and assured them that he is all right. If he drops some comments about cooperation with the other species too, everything should calm down in short order." "That will have to wait for some days," interrupted Director Clark. "Mr. Denebrin is currently unconscious and being treated for his concussion. His personal doctor assured me that he would be awake in the next 2 to 3 days. Another day of rest after that, and he will be good to go. I will personally contact and ask him to give a short interview about the attack to calm the public." Director Clark let his gaze wander through the room and said, "I trust you all will be able to keep the situation under control for a few days." "Yes, sir," came from every person in the room, Olivia included. "I will send some teams out to keep an eye on the situation in the bigger cities." Threw in Maurice Vasquez, a fellow operation coordinator whom Olivia only just now noticed to be present in the room. Many of the operation coordinators knew each other from either seeing each other during general meetings or when two operations were about to interfere with each other, and the coordinators had to sort out the mess. Oliva and Maurice didn't know each other well, having only met during general meetings about the current climate and situation of the galaxy. Their usual operation areas didn't have a lot in common, since Olivia directed operations outside the Alliance with a focus on the Batarian hegemony, while Maurice was one of the operations coordinators, entrusted with the internal security of the Alliance and homegrown threats like Cerberus. Some of my contacts implied that some of those newly risen resentments against aliens are the work of Cerberus. Furthermore, there are clues that the attack against the Turian family on Amaterasu was instigated by a Cerberus agent, or at least a sympathizer. I already sent a team to investigate, and they should get back to me in a matter of hours. When I get their report, I'll forward it with my recommendation on how to proceed to the chief analyst. "Good work," replied Director Clark simply with a short nod, but the comment brought a smile to Maurice's face, as if he had been praised to the heavens and back. "I expect the next 5 days will be a golden opportunity to infiltrate Cerberus and other likewise-minded groups. The current chaos and resentment are the perfect recruitment ground for them. Shouldn't be too hard to slip 1 or 2 people in unnoticed." Olivia had to suppress a snort. Chaos like that made it easier and harder at the same time to slip agents in. It was true that those groups recruited more people during those times, which made it easier for a mole to be placed inside an organization. Yet those organizations, at least the halfway competent ones, also expected to get some moles during such periods and kept those recruited away from sensitive information longer than if they had been recruited during normal times. Perfect timing, muttered the person to her right to his partner. There's a new batch of trainees that need some infiltration training. Sending them through the Cerberus gauntlet should be good for them. This time, Oliva couldn't hold back the slight smile that threatened to appear on her face. The Cerberus gauntlet, as it was called, was a training course that was only possible thanks to the relatively weird relationship the AIS had with Cerberus. It all started when, instead of incarcerating or killing caught Cerberus spies, Director Clark sent them back to Cerberus without any repercussions. Cerberus's response was to send the AIS agents they caught back to the AIS unharmed, and ever since Director Clark started the tradition to send in trainee agents to infiltrate the lower Cerberus ranks and test how long they could stay undercover until they were discovered. Something along the same lines was true for those agents training in counterintelligence. Every trainee chosen for the Cerberus gauntlet was told that this was a mission of utmost importance and that failure could mean their death. The trainees, of course, took those words to heart and went at it with the desired zeal, while the higher-ups waited to see their faces after their almost certain failure in the beginning phases of infiltration, and they got sent back with a nice try. Of course, this agreement only applied to the lower levels of secrecy and unimportant positions and information. The higher one climbed in Cerberus, the more dangerous it was for the agent if they were discovered. The same was true if a Cerberus agent got their hands on something important. If that happened, then the experienced part of the Internal Security Division got involved, and the Cerberus agent disappeared to be never seen again. "How is the situation with our most violent neighbor?" asked Director Clark after the rest of the report about the internal situation of the Alliance finished, something that Olivia cursed herself for not listening more closely to. But the moment Oliva heard the director talking about the most violent neighbor, her back straightened and her focus was back to where it belonged. After all, the Batarians, the Alliance's most violent neighbor, were her operations area. Our latest reports indicated that the Batarians are preparing a pirate incursion of unpreceded numbers. It seems like they want to use the current unrest in the colonies to attack while we are distracted. The Batarian government is using the situation to get rid of more and more undesirables and strengthen its grip on its population. If they should proceed unhindered, it could become a disaster for the Alliance. "Operations Coordinator Dove," called Director Clark, and Oliva looked to him after hearing her name. "I gave you the green light for Operation Fervor 2 days ago. I know it hasn't been much time, but how far along are you with the preparations?" "It would only take a few more hours, sir," responded Oliva, and added after she noticed the surprised expression on the director's face. If one could call a raised eyebrow a surprised expression, but it was Director Clark. So Olivia took what she could. "I made it a priority after the news of the attack came out. Distracting the Batarians had changed from an objective in the near future to one that had to happen immediately. The only thing left is to wait for the event. I already had that the guys in IT forged a fake data trail to our scapegoat." "Wonderful. Good work, OC Dove," praised Director Clark with a nod, and Oliva couldn't help the smug smile that she got when she was genuinely praised by the director of the AIS instead of getting an implied compliment. "I await your confirmation that everything went according to plan in the next 24 hours. And with those few words, the responsibility and the accompanying pressure on Olivia's shoulders increased tenfold. After telling everyone present that she finished her preparations, she downright boasted about it for AIS proportions. Her head would certainly land on the chopping block if anything went wrong. And with delicate operations like Fervor, anything could happen that would lead to a mission failure. An itch appeared on her neck, and Olivia had to stop herself from scratching it. It was a tic of hers that always appeared when her nerves started to get the best of her. "Director," she asked, and seeing him nod, she continued, "May I be excused from the rest of the meeting? I want to make sure that the operation runs smoothly and that nothing changed from when I got the last update from our people on site." He gave her his okay with a quick hand gesture before moving on to the next topic on the agenda, and Olivia left the room as quickly as she could, ignoring what was going on around her. She had left the room and walked down the hallway, turning a corner before leaning against the wall, with her right arm on the level of her head. A deep breath later, she hit the wall with her right fist and raised her head with a determined expression in her eyes. She said that fervor would go according to plan, and she would make sure it did. There would be no mistakes. The director and the AIS counted on her to run this operation smoothly, and she would prove to them that their faith wasn't undeserved. With purposeful steps, she walked toward her office. She had to make a call to the team on site. The 22nd of October, 2173, 1821. Erzbad, Wöhler System, Kite's Nest, City of Acre, Agent, classified code name, Heathen. He felt the wind caress his face like a lover's touch, and perhaps he could even enjoy it if it wasn't for the abhorrent smell that threatened to make him barf if he took too deep a breath. Yet he ignored it to the best of his ability. There could be no distractions, there could be no failure. His last talk with the operations coordinator, a scant few hours ago, made sure to impress that notion on him. A sigh left Heathen's mouth before he lifted the sniper rifle back up to look through the scope. The sight that greeted him was of a crowd of Batarians standing in front of a stage. Heathen looked around a bit more until he found his target a bit left of the stage and aimed at the target's head. His finger on the trigger. He put a bit of pressure on the trigger, but not enough to fire, before easing up and removing his index finger from it. Now wasn't the moment to finish his hunt. Heathen had been trained to see every mission like a hunt, just like every other member of Project Artemis. During a hunt, one had to be patient, able to stalk their target unnoticed, find the best position to strike, and wait for the opportune moment. And all of that without bringing yourself into danger. Of course, everyone who finished the Artemis training course got the best equipment available to perform to their maximum potential, but they were trained to do the same without any tools to help them. It didn't help that the training itself was beyond challenging and at times downright impossible to accomplish. But every graduate could call themselves one of the best snipers in the whole Alliance. Heathen had been originally part of the Alliance Navy, but chose to change to the AIS after finishing the program. It seemed like the logical conclusion to him after he honed his current skill set to be razor sharp. It could also be because he liked the thrill of the hunt. Of course, he had joined the Alliance with the reason to protect it, the same reason as so many other people. But over time, he discovered he had a knack for sniping and started to like it. It wasn't the act of killing that appealed to him, but the preparation, the needed skill to be successful, and the moment when he pulled the trigger and everything came together. Whenever he started to hunt, he also began to live and breathe it. Even his current name, Heathen, was part of his hunt. His real name belonged to the person Heathen was outside the hunt. But during it, he was just whatever code name got assigned to him. He was a hunter right now, not a person. A simple thought brought up the collection of video feeds from the various cameras he placed around the building, checking if anyone entered it since his last check, and if his exfiltration route was still open. There were some movements from the person next to him, but Heathen paid him no attention. Checking the feeds was more important for the moment. Satisfied with had he had seen, Heathen closed the feeds and sent a quick look next to him to examine his unwilling partner for this hunt. The Batarian was still deep asleep, but the slight movements indicated that the drugs were slowly losing their effect, and that it wouldn't take long until the Batarian returned to the world of the living. Not that Heathen expected the operation to take so long in the first place, so he just shrugged with his shoulder. The faint sound of cheering reached Heathen's ears, and he brought the scope back up to his eye. His target had just entered the stage and started with his speech. It would take a few more minutes until the priest of the pillars got the crowd excited enough. The AIS had chosen this particular priest as a target because he was a fervent proponent of the more considerate slave laws and a thorn in the upper class's collective arses by not conforming to the party line like so many other priests. The hegemony couldn't simply get rid of him because his flock, as the priest called them, on Erzbad, was large and loyal. Normally, the AIS would just let him do as he did, but lately his speeches had lost a lot of their usual fire, and information suggested he was getting involved with the sister of a relatively wealthy slave owner on the other side of the planet, and intended to court her. So it had been decided to use the last remaining flames of the priest's speeches to create a fire that would hopefully spill all over the Batarian territory. After all, he was about to be assassinated by one of the hegemony's agents on the orders of a slave owner. Or that would be the official story that all the evidence would support. The Batarian to Heathen's side had been seen as he entered the building, and would be found after the act dead with a bullet in his head, put there by himself after finishing his job. Just like some of the most fanatical government agents were trained to do from birth when there was no escaping unnoticed. The armor the AIS acquired in Heathen took great care to dress the Batarian and pointed in that direction of thought too. It wouldn't hold under intense scrutiny, but would be enough to incite the crowds and drive them into a blind rage. And after the rage subsided, it would be too late to stop the wave. The crosshairs of the Kishok harpoon was trained on the priest's zero head as he got more and more into his performance. Heathen's finger wandered to the trigger and got ready. The priest lifted his antique copy of the Pillars of Strength into the air, pointing with his other hand to it. Heathen let the air in his lungs slowly escape and increased the pressure with his index finger until the trigger relented. The stabilizers of his custom armor engaged and kept the recoil of the gun low. The harpoon-like spike flew unerringly straight toward its target, and when it arrived, nothing much remained of the priest's head. He laid the rifle on the floor next to the soon-to-be-dead Batarian and took a deep breath to break the remaining tension in his body. "And now to my least favorite part," Heathen mumbled, looking at the Batarian on the floor and ignoring the panic cries from across the city. Chapter 39. October 24, 2173, 1:23 local time. Ilium Tessel System, Nos Astra, Ad Astra Branch HQ, Secure Medical Ward. It was as if my consciousness returned to me with the snap of my fingers. One moment it was the deepest of blacks, and the next I returned to the world. A groan escaped my lips as I instinctively closed my eyes after foolishly opening them, only to be blinded by the light. I could hear people suddenly rushing around, but my only concern was whether it was possible to go back to sleep. The bed I was in didn't feel like mine, yet it was comfortable nonetheless. The thought brought me to a standstill. This wasn't my bed, yet I couldn't remember in whose bed I would go to sleep. There was no reason I would sleep in another's bed right now, or was there? A rush of memories assaulted me, and I bolted upright from my lying position. Thankfully, a pair of hands stopped me from falling back when my vision turned black for a moment. "Easy there, Mr. Dennebrun," I heard a voice say. "You got a bad concussion, and even with our advanced equipment, it will take some time to fully heal. So please take it slow in the meantime." My vision was still somewhat blurry, but I could make out the basic contours of a face in front of me. It was the face of an older gentleman with a distinguished presence. His black hair was peppered with white or gray streaks, and even the neatly trimmed beard encircling his face bore the marks of time. I tried to ask what happened, but whenever I opened my mouth to say something, my throat felt parched, and only a dry cough escaped. "Please wait a moment, sir," said the man, whom I finally could identify as Dr. Herman, after the remaining fog on my mind lifted. "A glass of water should suffice to deal with your speaking difficulties." He handed me a glass of ice-cold water and held 2 small pills in his left hand, which he offered me with a kind smile. "The pills are nothing special, but should help you with any lingering pain. One is a mild painkiller, and the other is a headache remedy," Dr. Herman explained when he saw my puzzled expression. "The latest test showed that the swelling inside your head is receding nicely, but it wouldn't surprise me if you still felt discomfort. Normally, as your doctor, I would recommend that you remain in bed for the foreseeable future. Yet if I know anything about you, Mr. Dennebrun, I expect you will probably reject my recommendation. Hence the painkiller and the headache remedy." I took both the glass of water and the pills from his hands with a grateful and apologizing smile before putting the medicine in my mouth and swallowing them with the help of the water. The feeling of the pills in my throat wasn't very pleasant, but it was thankfully over quickly. The water, on the other hand, helped alleviate the constant dryness that made me feel as if I were eating sand. "Thank you, Dr. Herman," I said after putting the empty glass on the stand next to the hospital bed I was laying in. Since the world didn't look like a blur anymore after my eyes finally got used to the artificial light, I finally took a look around the room to get a feeling of where I was. I recognized the room as one of the private ones of the medical ward inside the Ad Astra HQ here on Ilium. The room was well equipped and had a clean, sterile appearance. The walls were adorned with holographic displays showing vital signs and medical data of the patients fortunate enough to rest there. There were no actual windows, as the medical ward itself was placed in the center of the building's 26th floor for better security in case of attacks. But a holographic display to my right showed a nighttime view of Nosastra as if there had been a window in its place. "What happened?" I asked after I was sure that this time actual words would come out of my mouth instead of coughs. "I can't give a complete recount of the events," stated Dr. Herman, "since I got only called in after the attack was already over. But I notified the vice commander when you showed signs of waking up. She should arrive in a few minutes." "She?" I asked, not understanding why the doctor was using that word. "Wasn't Ajax Dubal the vice commander of the local Ad Astra security forces?" "I'm sorry to say that Vice Commander Dubal died in the line of duty," explained Dr. Herman with a remorseful expression. "I heard he was a good and dutiful man. Ad Astra will mourn his loss." The doctor was only giving the usual condolences. Yet I appreciated it nonetheless. It wasn't like I knew the previous vice commander well either, but the man gave his life protecting mine, and that wasn't something I took lightly. "That she will," I responded in a solemn tone, before a determination welled up inside me that I hadn't felt for some years. And Ad Astra will not only mourn his loss, but find those responsible and respond in a manner befitting the situation. Dr. Herman looked taken aback at my declaration of essentially declaring war on my attackers, before a grim expression settled over his face. "Good," he said. "There were more dead than just the vice commander, and even more were injured. I am not fond of playing the role of coroner in addition to my duties as a lifesaver. I much prefer the latter, much more rewarding in my opinion. And during those duties, I got to meet many of those that lost their lives in the attack. They were good people, rough around the edges, but good and honest people nonetheless. I'm going to look forward to what is going to happen." The doctor's not-so-subtle approval of my intention of making those that participated in the attack and those who backed them from the shadows didn't surprise me in the least. Ad Astra was a tightly knit family. If you were an employee of the company, even those on the other side of the galaxy would help you even if you had never met them before, just because you were working for the same company. It was a mindset I carefully cultivated over the years with me as the head of the family. The trust and respect each employee showed each other not only reduced any workplace friction, but made it harder for other companies to poach my people or turn them against me. And such an open attack against the company? Well, that only meant that everyone was closing ranks against the threat from outside and got ready to retaliate in the names of their lost brothers and sisters. I had no idea how the employees inside Alliance territory were taking the news of the attack, but since my more devoted employees, I refused to call them fanatical, least of all because that would shine a bad light on me and my company. We weren't a cult after all. Came from there, I did not doubt that there were rising tensions, especially among those who were more xenophobic than the rest. There was a knock on the door and the good doctor went to open it, as he was one of the few people whose Omni tool had permission to open it as a security precaution while I was unconscious. Meanwhile, I was already making a list of things I had to do after leaving the bed, now that the doctor gave me his quiet permission to go back to work as long as I didn't overdo it. One of the first things on my agenda would be to hold a series of interviews that would hopefully help to calm down the situation. Of course, firstly, I would have to be briefed on the situation, as giving an interview without knowing all the available facts and information would leave me vulnerable to unexpected questions. Right now, I had to show an image of strength, that this attack wouldn't hold me down in the least. Furthermore, I had to curb the xenophobic tendencies that had undoubtedly sprung up. Holding only those behind the attack responsible and focusing on those that tried to use this moment of weakness to their advantage would hopefully accomplish just that, since there was no doubt that some rivals inside the Alliance tried to do just that. And those were human. It would distract from the issue that my attackers were exclusively aliens. At least that was the impression I got from the few tidbits I remembered from the actual attack. Yet it wouldn't surprise me if that was the case. Human mercenaries, while not unheard of, were still rare in the galaxy. More and more human mercenary groups were popping up in recent years, and established groups like Eclipse started to let humans join them, but the total numbers were still on the low side. Furthermore, getting the typical human mercenary to attack Ad Astra, and me specifically, without any thoughts of going behind their customer's back and informing my people about the impending attack wasn't an easy task. It would mean that the person behind the attack had incredible pull, not only on Ilium, but throughout the galaxy, the Alliance included, to gather the necessary people. I hear the door open with an almost silent hiss, but didn't look who entered as my previous thought played through my mind again and again. The person behind the attack had to have incredible pull and had to have planned it for a long time. That person either corrupted, blackmailed, or threatened one of my shuttle drivers, or got someone to infiltrate the group of drivers, or else he wouldn't have tried to get away as soon as I got out of it. While an investigation would show which one of those options was the case, I personally hoped it wasn't the latter. It would speak of a plan that had to have been long in the making and a disturbingly large security leak. The security measures and checks here on Ilium may not be up to the standards of, say, Earth, Terra Nova, or the Citadel, but they were extensive nonetheless. Getting a mole in and having him there for at least a year should have been impossible. I was interrupted in my thought process when a woman at the end of her 20s stopped next to my bed and coughed to get my attention. She was dressed in the official uniform of the Ad Astra security forces and had a stern expression on her face. But I could see sparks of relief in her brown eyes at seeing me up and about. There was a burn scar at the upper left of her forehead that disappeared into her dark brown hair and gave the woman the air of someone who had experienced hard battles and survived. Not completely, but mostly. "It's good to see you recovering, boss," said Vice Commander Sheryl Olivier, her rather high-pitched voice being in stark contrast to her warrior appearance. "Thanks, I feel rather well, all things considered." "How is the situation?" I asked, coming right to the important points. Congratulating Sheryl on her new position was superfluous and in bad taste. She got her position because the previous vice commander died in the line of duty, and not because of her merits. Oh, she would have gotten the position in time anyway. From what I heard, she was ambitious and dedicated enough to work her way up. Yet I didn't think that she imagined she would get the post as vice commander so soon, or in this way. Vice Commander Olivier straightened up at my question and replied in a completely professional tone, "The building is currently on high alert, and all security measures are activated at this moment. Every member of our local security forces is in the building, and even sleeping in the basement barracks when they're off duty. No aircraft is allowed to approach the building above the 3rd floor, and even should a shuttle get through the AA turrets targeting them, every entry point is shielded by a double layer of kinetic shields. The engineers are making sure that the power reactors in the lower basement floors are running smoothly and not overheating due to the energy they're outputting. Every employee wishing to enter the building has to go through double and triple checks of their identity and respond with the appropriate passwords concerning if they or their families are under pressure from outside sources. The same applies to guests. Those are also accompanied by a security officer outside of uniform for the duration of their business here." She took a short breath before finishing with the sentence. "In short, Mr. Denebrin, sir, we're on our war footing right now." Excessive? I asked to get her personal opinion if the standard protocols were too much in this situation. "No, sir," Sheryl answered without a moment's pause. "The situation outside makes it clear that the measures we're taking are absolutely appropriate." "The situation outside?" I asked. "What's going on? Is there a war going on?" I asked the last question jokingly, but the expression on the vice commander's face told me that I wasn't too far off. My face suddenly felt slightly cold, and I could feel how the blood left it. "In a manner of speaking," Sheryl slowly answered, "you are right." "In what manner?" I gritted out, feeling how my temper was beginning to rise at her evasive answer. Cheryl's posture had slowly relaxed as she rattled down the security measures of the building. But hearing my growl put the tension right back into her shoulders, and a hint of nervousness flitted through her eyes, as if expecting I would bite her head off when I heard the news. It wasn't like it was her fault anyway. The aftermath of events like the attack was solely in the hands of the people trying to take advantage of them, and I counted myself as such a person. There was no point in trying to deceive me by saying I wouldn't. After all, there were numerous examples of accidents in Ad Astra's mining branch that I used to portray myself as a caring and concerned employer to get good PR. "We are under attack from all sides and on all levels we're operating on," began Vice Commander Sheryl, and I was rather impressed that she kept every hint of nervousness from my piercing stare out of her voice. "Our IT department has to fend off numerous cyber attacks. not just at our servers, but those of our closest associates on the planet as well. Those businesses are under attack on the stock market too. Someone is trying to buy up as many shares as they can. If this continues, our analysts agree that we're going to lose a lot of our influence on the planet. Furthermore, they tried to buy a chunk of shares of Ad Astra Ilium too when our stock prices fell to the floor in the wake of the attack. But our brokers put a stop to that before more than 1/20 of our total shares got away from our control. That's nothing unusual, I commented. We had to deal with those issues since we opened the branch here on Ilium. True, she admitted, but the scale is unusual. For both the amount of buyers and cyber attacks, the latter is unusually coordinated too. In fact, everything is unusually coordinated. Everything seemed to start at the same moment and took us by surprise. We were slow to respond to all the sudden fires springing up and couldn't smother them before some of them turned into bonfires. I'm guessing those two problems you mentioned aren't the bonfires? I guessed warily. No, sir. That would be the gang war happening on Ilium's lower levels. A gang war? I choked out surprised. That was definitely a surprise and an unwelcome one at that. No wonder the vice commander was nervous. It wasn't something that was openly known, as that would be the height of stupidity and the source of never-ending fodder for the press. But Ad Astra had some relationships with the gangs here on Ilium. To be truthful, not just here on Ilium, but on every planet that housed more than a simple warehouse. After all, it was much easier to pay those gangs than constantly keep an eye on them. Threatening them with complete destruction if they broke the agreement was mostly enough to keep them in line. The added benefit of them keeping an eye out for trouble caused by gangs we weren't bribing couldn't be ignored either. As long as our gangs didn't do anything too outrageous, or dealt in things we, or better said I, couldn't condone, they were paid a good sum of money and had easy access to a selection of our armaments. Nothing groundbreaking or advanced, just upper selection for the civilian market to much better prices than the public. That wasn't something I liked to do, but it kept the peace better than leaving them alone. And as long as they only pointed those guns at other criminal groups, the division inside Ad Astra's security forces that dealt with the eradication of problematic pests wouldn't have to pay a visit to them. Of course, nothing was perfect, and the vermin exterminators, as they were called inside the forces, had often to make an example first before our criminal associates got the message and behaved like we wanted. And if they didn't, well, then they would shortly stop to exist. And the group we approached next would have a very good example of what happened if they also thought the rules we established didn't apply to them. What is the level of the current damage? I asked to get a better picture of the situation. It was one thing to know that there was a war going on that involved some of our assets, but should it just be some minor altercations that got misnamed as such, then I could relax and let the security division handle it without much input from my side. 2 of the 5 minor groups who chose to ally with the Black Varens and the Bloody Clubs have been eradicated by the other side. The other 3 are hanging on a thread. Intelligence suggests that at least one of them will either run away and cut every tie to the Black Varens or switch sides. And how are the Black Varens and the Bloody Clubs doing? The Black Varens and the Bloody Clubs were the 2 gangs my analysts recommended to approach to get an in into Ilium's underworld. Contrary to their violent name, the Bloody Clubs were rather peaceful and non-violent for a street gang. They got their name from the weapon of their founder, Pasvarica, a Solarian. Of course, I wouldn't trust any of those gangs further than I could spit without additional information about their general behavior and history, and thus I found out that they started as a group of vigilantes that rose up against the gang which had been terrorizing their neighborhood. I didn't know the name of the latter, but that wasn't important since the Bloody Clubs eradicated them. The actual event behind the name was that their founder beat a mook of the terrorizing gang, a Krogan at that, dead with nothing but a normal steel pipe after the mook killed his brother for the heck of it. The original reason for the founding of the Bloody Clubs disappeared, but they kept existing and transformed during the following 20 years into a criminal gang themselves whose main specialty was running protection rackets. Nowadays, they were still doing that, just under a new overlord. They were keeping an eye out for our business at the docks and the smaller shops that were under Ad Astra's patronage. The Black Varens, on the other hand, were just like the animal they named themselves after. They were attack dogs that couldn't be controlled but directed in specific directions, as long as you had enough treats to keep them entertained. At least they knew what would happen to them if they entertained the idea to bite the hand that feeds them. One of their subordinate groups already had a not-so-nice meeting with Ad Astra's vermin exterminators. They are not doing very well. The enemy's opening move killed around 2/5 of their overall strength. Until now, almost half their people got killed. And if we hadn't intervened, then it could very well be that the Black Varens, the Bloody Clubs, and their subordinate groups would have been destroyed in one swoop. And what were the costs of this intervention? That the vice commander actually winced, visibly winced at that, told me that things would go from bad to worse after her next sentence, and I tried to prepare myself for the inevitable shock and following anger that would come up inside me. We lost 10 security personnel belonging to the strike teams and 2/3 of our local exterminators. To me, it felt like the world had suddenly gone silent and started to spin a little. I slowly lay back down, my head hitting the pillow on the bed softly, and I concentrated to keep my breathing calm and steady. Losing 2 complete strike teams wasn't good, but not unexpected. They were well trained and could hold their own in any kind of situation. Yet should they be surprised or confronted with too many opponents at once, they could be easily overwhelmed. But half of the local exterminators, they were Ad Astra's Special Ops Division, for crying out loud. Most of them were N4S and up that had been discharged from the Alliance military for various reasons, and before letting them get snatched up by Cerberus or other groups with not-so-noble intentions, Ad Astra gave them a chance for a new life. All of them had a certain quality that you just couldn't get elsewhere. 4 out of 6 former N-school graduates dead in a gang war. What kind of shit was going on since I fell unconscious? How? I rasped out and took the glass of water Dr. Herman, who I had completely forgotten was still in the room until now, held out to me. It tasted somewhat strangely. The doctor had probably added something to calm my nerves, but I still drank the whole glass in one go. An ambush specifically planned to take them on. They took out 2 of the attacking gangs before Eclipse showed up and got involved. The prior fighting exhausted our teams, and they decided to retreat. It was then that Eclipse sprung the trap, and in the chaos they managed to kill 4, while the remaining 2, Asher and Cordelia, managed to flee and inform us about what happened. I hope Eclipse suffered for that, I muttered darkly before perking up, noticing a detail I hadn't before. Eclipse? Yes, sir, answered Sheryl my unasked question. It seems like whoever is behind our current troubles managed to get a contingent of Eclipse mercenaries on their side. We also know, thanks to identifying one of the bodies as an Eclipse lieutenant, that it was them that orchestrated the attack on HQ. It's unknown if Jonah Sedaris is also involved or even knows what her men are up to here on Ilium, but we're currently trying to find out